Constantinople, 641 CE. In the Imperial palace, a woman who once commanded armies watches as physicians approach with heated irons and sharp blades. She is Empress Martina, widow of Emperor Heraclius, regent of the empire. 3 days ago, she sat on the throne. Today, she will never speak again. The physicians don't kill her. That would be merciful. Instead, they cut out her tongue. Not quickly, not cleanly. The procedure takes minutes that stretch into eternity. The Byzantines had perfected this. They knew exactly how much to remove to ensure she would never articulate words again, never issue commands, never whisper conspiracies. Her screams fill the palace corridors, but by sunset, she can only make wet, choking sounds. This wasn't murder, this was law. You think you know about medieval cruelty. You've heard about European witch trials, about Roman gladiators, about Viking raids, but what the Byzantine Empire did to empresses who fell from power was something different, something more calculated, something that understood that for women who had tasted absolute authority, death was too simple an ending. What I'm about to show you isn't hidden in conspiracy theories or disputed by historians. This is documented in Byzantine legal codes, described in church chronicles, recorded by palace officials who watched it happen. The Byzantine Empire, that thousand-year continuation of Rome, that bastion of Christianity and classical learning, had a legal system specifically designed to destroy powerful women in ways that left them alive to serve as warnings. The question isn't whether this happened. The question is why we don't talk about how a Christian empire turned female bodies into political billboards, how emperors used mutilation as statecraft, and how the church blessed every cut. If you're ready to learn what your history teachers never mentioned about power, gender, and the mechanics of imperial control, then stay with me. Because what follows isn't just disturbing. It's a masterclass in how civilizations weaponize suffering against women who dare to rule. Hit that like button if you can handle where we're going. Subscribe to Ancient Africa Untold, because someone needs to tell the stories that make empires uncomfortable. Let's descend into the purple halls of Byzantium, where the color of imperial robes was the same as fresh bruises, and where empresses learned that crowns offered no protection once the balance of power shifted. The Byzantine Empire operated on a principle that Western histories often sanitize. Political legitimacy flowed through blood, marriage, and violence in equal measure. An empress wasn't simply a monarch's wife. She was a conduit of power, a maker of emperors, sometimes a ruler in her own right. The title Augusta carried weight. It meant you could issue edicts, command armies, influence succession. You were purple-born or purple-married, porphyrogenita, a sacred status that in theory placed you beyond common law. But theory and practice diverged brutally in Byzantium. When an emperor died, when a coup succeeded, when political winds shifted, empresses discovered that their sacred status evaporated like morning mist on the Bosphorus. What replaced it was something more ancient than Christianity, more fundamental than law, the understanding that powerful women were aberrations to be corrected. The Byzantine legal code inherited from Rome made one thing perfectly clear: women existed under male authority. Fathers, husbands, emperors. A woman who ruled alone, who commanded in her own name, who made decisions affecting the empire, was legally transgressing natural order. She could be tolerated during a crisis, accepted during a regency, even celebrated if she produced male heirs. But the moment her utility ended, the moment political rivals gained advantage, that same legal framework that had elevated her became the instrument of her destruction. And the Byzantines had refined destruction into art. Martina's mutilation wasn't an accident of mob violence or the random cruelty of angry soldiers. It was a carefully planned procedure carried out by imperial physicians under orders from the Senate and the new emperor. The choice of punishment revealed sophisticated understanding of gendered power. They didn't blind her, though that was common enough for male rivals. They didn't execute her, though that would have been simpler. They removed her tongue. Think about what that meant. Martina had been regent, ruling the empire alongside her son. Her power came from her voice, issuing commands, conducting diplomacy, speaking in council. By removing her tongue, they didn't just silence her. They marked her as someone who had spoken above her station. The mutilation carried a message readable by anyone who saw her disfigured face. This is what happens to women who use their voices to claim power. But the tongue was only the beginning. Her son, the young co-emperor, was mutilated alongside her. They slit his nose. In Byzantine culture, physical perfection was required for imperial rule. A mutilated face disqualified you from the throne. Mother and son were destroyed together, their bodies carved to match their political fall. Then they were exiled. Not killed, not hidden away in comfortable house arrest. They were paraded through Constantinople so the crowds could see what had been done to them. Martina, unable to speak, unable to protest, reduced to making animal sounds while citizens who had once bowed before her jeered and celebrated her degradation. She was shipped to Rhodes, confined to a monastery, forced to spend the rest of her life in prayer and silence. The message was perfect. An empress who had commanded armies now couldn't even command her own voice. A woman who had worn purple now wore the black habit of a nun. The same society that had called her Augusta now called her a usurper, a whore, an abomination. This wasn't one mad emperor's cruelty. This was policy. The Byzantine practice of mutilating political rivals had a terrible efficiency. Execution created martyrs. Exile allowed the possibility of return. But mutilation, particularly facial mutilation, permanently marked the victim as disqualified from power while keeping them alive as warnings. For male rivals, blinding was preferred. A blind man couldn't see to fight, couldn't read military reports, couldn't function as emperor. But for women, the mutilations were chosen to destroy specifically feminine forms of power. They cut out tongues to silence voices that had spoken commands. They slit noses to destroy beauty that had attracted emperors. They shaved heads to strip away the elaborate hairstyles that marked imperial status. They stripped empresses naked before crowds to humiliate bodies that had been draped in silk and jewels. Every mutilation was calculated to destroy a specific avenue of female power while leaving the victim alive to embody her own destruction. Empress Irene of Athens discovered this when she fell from power in 802. She had done something unprecedented. A woman had ruled the Byzantine Empire as emperor, not empress. She had called herself Basileus, the male form of the title. She had commanded armies, negotiated with Charlemagne, restored icon veneration. For a woman to hold such power violated every principle of Byzantine political theology. When the coup came, led by her own finance minister, Irene was arrested in the palace. She was 60 years old. She had ruled for over 2 decades, first as regent and then in her own name. None of it mattered. The new emperor, Nikephoros, could have executed her quickly. Instead, he chose exile to the island of Lesbos, where she was confined to a monastery and forced to support herself through spinning and weaving. Women's work, manual labor, the deliberate reduction of an emperor to the status of a common woman engaged in humble tasks. She died within a year, broken not by violence but by the systematic erasure of everything she had been. Her name was struck from official records. Her images were destroyed. The church that had supported her was now silent about her reign. She became a cautionary tale, a woman who had overstepped so badly that even speaking her name brought pollution. But Irene at least died in obscurity. Others weren't granted even that mercy. Pause here for a moment and ask yourself, if these were the fates of empresses at the height of Byzantine power, what happened to those captured from rival empires? What did Byzantine emperors do to foreign queens who had dared oppose them? If this is making you question everything you thought you knew about medieval civilization, hit that subscribe button. We're going deeper, and what comes next reveals how the Byzantines turned captured empresses into living proof that no woman, no matter how powerful, stood beyond reach of imperial vengeance. The chronicles record what happened to Theophano, the daughter of a Byzantine emperor, married off to the Holy Roman Emperor Otto II to seal a political alliance. When Otto died and her son was still a child, Theophano ruled as regent in Germany. She commanded armies, issued laws, negotiated treaties, all the functions of an emperor. But she had been born in Byzantium, and when she died, Byzantine chroniclers couldn't resist recording their judgment. They called her death divine punishment for a woman who had presumed to rule men. But recorded judgments were gentle compared to what happened to empresses who fell into enemy hands during the constant wars between Byzantium and its neighbors, Persians, Arabs, Bulgarians. When the Bulgarian Khan Krum defeated Byzantine forces in 811, he had Emperor Nikephoros beheaded. The emperor's skull was turned into a drinking cup, lined with silver, used in victory feasts. Brutal, yes, but clean. For the Byzantine empresses and noblewomen captured in that same battle, what followed was designed not to honor their enemy's victory but to humiliate the Byzantine state itself through the systematic degradation of its women. The captured noblewomen were distributed among Bulgarian warriors as concubines. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated political theater. By forcing Byzantine noblewomen into sexual servitude, the Bulgarians sent a message back to Constantinople. Your empire cannot protect its women. Your sacred status means nothing. We have taken what you claimed was inviolable. When some of these women were eventually ransomed back to Byzantine control, they faced a second humiliation. They were considered polluted, defiled by barbarian contact. Instead of restoration to their former status, many were forced into monasteries. They had been violated by enemies, and Byzantine society responded by erasing them from public life, marking them as contaminated by the very violence that had been inflicted upon them. The empire that claimed Christian virtue, that built soaring churches and preserved classical learning, that called itself the New Rome. That same empire had codified a system where women paid for military defeats with their bodies and then were punished again for surviving. And this wasn't limited to foreign wars. Empresses who fell from power within palace politics faced similar fates, but with an added dimension of ritual humiliation designed to maximize public spectacle. When Empress Zoe Carbonopsina fell from power in 1920, she was accused of poisoning the previous emperor, a charge almost certainly fabricated by her political enemies. The actual evidence didn't matter. What mattered was that she had ruled as regent, had exercised power in her own name, and now a new faction wanted her removed. They couldn't execute her without trial, and a trial might reveal the accusations as false. So they chose a different path. Zoe was forcibly tonsured. Her head was shaved in public. The elaborate hairstyles that marked her imperial status literally cut away. She was stripped of purple robes and dressed in the black habit of a nun. Then she was paraded through the streets of Constantinople, crowds jeering as she was marched to a convent where she would spend the rest of her life. The humiliation was multifaceted and deliberate. Shaving her head destroyed the elaborate hairstyles that took hours to construct, that marked status and femininity in Byzantine culture. Stripping her of purple, the color reserved for imperial family, the dye so expensive that its use was restricted by law, reduced her to visual anonymity. Dressing her as a nun forced her into the one role Byzantine society deemed acceptable for women who had lost male protection: religious seclusion. But the parade itself was the most crucial element. If they had simply confined her to a monastery, some might have seen her as tragic, possibly innocent. By marching her through the streets in humiliation, they transformed her into spectacle. Every citizen who watched learned the lesson. No woman, regardless of birth or previous power, stood beyond the reach of political violence once male authority decided to move against her. And the convents themselves, those weren't sanctuaries. They were prisons dressed in religious language. Byzantine monasteries and convents operated under imperial control. When an empress was sent to a convent, she wasn't choosing religious life. She was being permanently removed from political society, confined in isolation, stripped of her children and her wealth, forced to spend the rest of her days in prayer and manual labor. Many convents had special cells built specifically for imperial exiles, small, windowless rooms where deposed empresses lived under constant guard. Some never left those cells except for mandatory prayers. Some were forbidden from speaking to other nuns. Some lived for decades in confinement, aging into obscurity while the empire moved on without them, their names becoming cautionary tales whispered to ambitious women. Remember what happened to her. The church blessed all of this. Patriarch after patriarch sanctioned the forced monasticism of empresses, declaring it spiritually beneficial for women who had wielded inappropriate power. If an empress tried to resist being sent to a convent, the church could simply declare her a heretic, which carried additional penalties including confiscation of property and loss of any remaining legal rights. This created a perfect closed system. Imperial law permitted the mutilation and confinement of political enemies. Church authority sanctioned forced monasticism as spiritually correct. Together, they gave emperors tools to destroy rival empresses while maintaining the fiction of Christian mercy and legal process. Death would have been cleaner. But Byzantium understood that living destruction served power better than quick execution. An empress who died in battle or by assassination might be mourned, might be remembered with sympathy, might inspire future resistance. An empress whose tongue had been cut out, whose face had been mutilated, who lived in monastic confinement, making wet, choking sounds when she tried to speak. She served as a permanent warning of what happened to women who claimed power. And the children of these fallen empresses? They rarely survived their mother's fall. When Martina was mutilated and exiled, her son, Constantine III, had already died under suspicious circumstances. Her other sons were declared illegitimate, removed from the succession, and scattered to monasteries where most died young. The official records don't always specify how they died. Monastery records simply note that they were received, and later that they were buried. The suspicious absence of detail suggests what everyone knew but couldn't say openly. Unwanted imperial children rarely survived long in monastic confinement. Empress Euphrosyne, who had plotted against Emperor Alexios III in the late 11th century, was sent to a convent after her conspiracy failed. Her daughter was sent to a different convent. They were forbidden from communicating. Euphrosyne spent the last 15 years of her life knowing her daughter was alive somewhere in Constantinople, but unable to see her, speak to her, or even send messages. The physical separation was calculated cruelty, keeping both women alive but destroying the maternal bond, ensuring Euphrosyne understood that her political actions had cost not just her freedom, but her connection to her child. This is where the systematic nature of Byzantine imperial cruelty becomes most clear. They didn't just want to punish, they wanted to hollow out empresses from the inside, to destroy everything that had made their lives meaningful while keeping them alive to feel the loss. Some empresses tried to resist. Empress Theodora, the wife of Justinian, came from the lowest possible origins, an actress and courtesan, occupations considered barely above prostitution in Byzantine society. When she married Justinian and became empress, she faced constant attacks from nobles who considered her unworthy of the title. But Theodora had survived worse than palace politics. She knew how power worked. When Justinian faced a massive riot that nearly toppled his reign, when his advisors told him to flee the capital, Theodora reportedly said, "Purple makes an excellent shroud." She wasn't going to run. She would rather die as empress than live as a refugee. Her defiance saved Justinian's throne. He stayed, crushed the riot with extreme violence, and consolidated power. Theodora ruled alongside him for decades, using imperial authority to protect other women. She established laws against forced prostitution, created refugees for women escaping sexual slavery, and ensured that rape carried actual penalties instead of being treated as property damage. But Theodora was the exception that proved the rule. She survived because she had Justinian's unwavering support and because she understood power viscerally in ways nobly born empresses often didn't. Most empresses weren't so fortunate. Most fell when emperors died, when coups succeeded, when the delicate balance of palace politics shifted against them. And when they fell, Byzantine law and custom had 1,000 ways to destroy them without technically committing murder. Consider what this meant for any woman navigating Byzantine imperial politics. You could be born into the purple, raised with every expectation of authority, married to an emperor, crowned as Augusta, command armies and issue edicts, and all of it could be stripped away in a single night when the wrong faction gained power. Everything you were could be erased. Your name could be struck from records. Your images could be destroyed. Your children could be scattered or killed. Your body could be mutilated to mark you as permanently disqualified from power. You could be forced into a convent where you would spend decades in isolation, watching your hands age while you spun wool and contemplated what you had lost. The psychological torture of this system was profound. Execution would end suffering. Byzantine mutilation and confinement extended it across years or decades. You lived with the physical pain of mutilation, with the humiliation of being displayed as a warning, with the knowledge that you had been powerful and now were powerless, that you had spoken and now were silenced, that you had commanded and now were commanded, and you couldn't even speak of it. Your tongue was gone. By now, you might be wondering, why did Byzantine culture develop such specifically gendered cruelty? Why not just execute political rivals regardless of gender? Why the elaborate rituals of mutilation and forced monasticism for women? The answer reveals something fundamental about how Byzantine society understood power and gender. In Byzantine political theology, the emperor wasn't simply a political leader. He was the earthly reflection of divine order, God's representative on earth. His power was sacred, absolute, and specifically masculine. When an empress ruled, either as regent or in her own name, she was temporarily embodying masculine authority. This was theologically problematic but could be tolerated during emergencies. But once the crisis passed, once a male heir came of age or a new emperor took power, the empress's exercise of masculine authority became retroactively illegitimate. She hadn't been divinely ordained. She had been usurping, and usurpation required punishment that addressed both the political crime and the gender transgression. Mutilation served both purposes perfectly. Politically, it permanently removed the empress from power. But symbolically, it marked her body as having been in the wrong place, exercising the wrong kind of authority, speaking when she should have been silent, commanding when she should have been obedient. The forced monasticism completed the correction. Byzantine theology recognized only two acceptable roles for women: wife and mother under male authority, or none removed from public life entirely. An empress who had ruled alone existed outside this binary. Sending her to a convent forced her back into acceptable categories, no longer a political actor, no longer a wielder of masculine power, but a woman properly enclosed, properly silenced, properly removed from spheres of authority. This wasn't madness, this was logic. Brutal, misogynistic, terrifying logic, but logic nonetheless. The Byzantine system understood that killing empresses created martyrs and succession crises. Mutilating and confining them solved the political problem while reinforcing gender hierarchies and providing public spectacle that demonstrated imperial power. Every mutilated empress, every woman paraded in degradation to a convent, every imperial mother separated from her children and locked in isolation. all of them served the same function. They were living lessons in what happened when women claimed authority that Byzantine political theology reserved for men. The empire lasted 1,000 years, from the founding of Constantinople in 330 CE to its fall to the Ottoman Turks in 1453. Across that millennium, countless empresses rose and fell. Most are forgotten. The chronicles don't record what happened to minor empresses, to women who briefly held power before being swept away. We have detailed accounts of spectacular falls, Martina, Irene, Zoe, because their destruction was public enough to demand recording. But for every empress whose mutilation made it into the chronicles, how many others disappeared into convents without fanfare? How many were quietly murdered and the deaths attributed to illness? How many lived out their days in monastic cells, growing old in isolation, their names already being forgotten by the empire that once called them Augusta? The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 didn't invent new forms of gendered violence. They inherited the Byzantine system and adapted it. When Ottoman sultans confined their own mothers and sisters in the harem system, when they prohibited imperial women from wielding political power directly, when they created elaborate protocols to ensure women's subordination within the palace, they were continuing patterns the Byzantines had refined across centuries. The final Byzantine empress, whose name was Helena Palaeologina, lived to see Constantinople fall. She was in her 70s, the widow of the last emperor Constantine V, who died defending the walls. After the city fell, she negotiated with Sultan Mehmed II for protection. The Sultan granted it, not out of mercy, but because keeping the last Byzantine empress alive and under his control sent a message about Ottoman power superseding Byzantine claims. Helena spent her final years in Ottoman-controlled Constantinople, living on a pension provided by the Sultan, watching the Hagia Sophia transformed into a mosque, knowing she was the end of a 1,000-year line. When she died, there were no imperial funerals, no succession questions, no rivals fighting for power. She simply died, and with her died the last physical connection to the Byzantine imperial system that had used women's bodies as political battlegrounds for a millennium. But the logic that justified Byzantine cruelty to empresses didn't die. It persisted, it evolved. The idea that women who claim political power are transgressing natural order, that their exercise of authority is temporary and illegitimate, that their fall should be more humiliating than men's. These ideas weren't unique to Byzantium. They were refinements of patterns found across imperial systems. Look at what happened to powerful women in other empires. Chinese empresses poisoned or forced to suicide when their sons died. Egyptian queens erased from king lists when later pharaohs deemed them illegitimate. European queens accused of adultery and executed when their husbands needed new marriages. The specific methods varied. The underlying pattern remained. Women who wielded power faced gendered violence when that power was taken away. The Byzantines simply perfected the system, codifying it in law, sanctifying it through church approval, and turning the destruction of empresses into public spectacle that taught every woman in the empire the limits of what she could aspire to. You've now witnessed how a Christian empire weaponized mutilation, how church and state collaborated to break powerful women, how legal systems transformed empresses into living warnings. The purple robes of Byzantine power were dyed with shellfish secretions, but they were maintained with women's blood, women's tongues, women's lives spent in monastic cells contemplating power they had briefly held and would never touch again. This isn't ancient history disconnected from our present. This is the blueprint. Every time a powerful woman is destroyed, not just politically but personally, not just defeated but humiliated, not just removed from office but publicly degraded, the Byzantine logic persists. The specific tools have changed. The fundamental pattern endures. Byzantine emperors understood something that echoes across centuries. Killing powerful women makes martyrs, but destroying them systematically, legally, publicly, that teaches lessons that last 1,000 years. Martina choking on her own blood as her tongue was cut out wasn't just the fall of one empress. It was a message carved into flesh and carried through Byzantine history. Women can rise, but when they fall, we will make sure everyone watches. We will make sure the fall is so complete, so humiliating, so systematically destructive that the next woman who reaches for power will remember what happened to those who reached before her. The Byzantine Empire is gone. The mutilated empresses are dust. But the lesson they were forced to embody, that women's claim to power is always conditional, always subject to masculine approval, always vulnerable to gendered violence disguised as law, that lesson was taught so thoroughly that we're still unlearning it. If this has revealed something about power you can't forget, share this video. Let others see what empires do to women who dare to rule. Subscribe to Ancient Africa Untold because history's darkest truths deserve to be spoken, and the voices that were silenced deserve to be heard, even if we can only speak for them now, centuries after their tongues were cut out and their screams echoed through palace halls before fading into the Byzantine silence that we're only now beginning to break.